welcome everybody to the WRST Collabs podcast. I'm your host, Alex Wykoff, and I'm here with Parker and Jake from Ava Labs. So welcome.
What's up? What's up? Thanks for having us, man.
Thanks, man. Really excited to dig in here.
Totally. So first things first, for the folks, a lot of the folks who kind of check in on us and watch our podcast or listen in, they're quite new to Web3. So what is Ava Labs?
Can you give it a stab?
Yeah, I'll give it a stab. So Ava Labs is the studio behind the Avalanche blockchain. We work with project teams to ensure their success in building on the blockchain. We basically measure our, success from our fastest time to finality compared to all the other blockchains, and basically how we have positioned ourselves as of late is basically our goal is to digitize all assets. And in doing so, we have a lot of narratives behind that, NFTs being one of them, which inherently provides that value. Gaming, which is where I come from, is providing that avenue for success as well. And this is all done through our ability to scale horizontally through the use of subnets. Jake, take a stab at anything?
Yeah, so no, just from our side, we sit on the business development team, and so I'm on the NFT team, and Parker's on the gaming, as well as kind of help support the crossover between the two. So really our goal is to help support teams, whether it's integration from another chain, integrating from kind of more of a Web2 business standpoint, co-market with them, see where we can support in various ways. We also have an ecosystem, job board that we can help amplify open positions to teams. So there's a handful of ways we work with different teams and support them, and it's kind of just a one-off working with them to really decipher what kind of that best path forward is in terms of support of where we could provide.
Wow. Okay. So there was a lot to unpack all through here. A lot of times our audience is a bit less technical, so I'd love to just take a beat and talk about finality first. That was like the first word that kind of rung in my ears. So finality, as I understand it, is this idea of like when you open your wallet and you start a transaction to the time at which that kind of whole transaction is done. And in the Web 2 world, or like the plain old world that we all live in real life, we can have an example of like when you're at the checkout, right? And you put your card in the machine, that's the start of the transaction. And then what happens is that transaction's in play. It actually stays in play for a number of days in like our plain world that we live in. And then if you ever like log into your credit card provider or whatever, you can see like pending transactions, right? And then at a certain point in time, they stop being pending, and that's finalized.
Yeah.
In blockchain world, it seems like that happens way faster. Even for like slow blockchains, it's still faster than most credit cards.
Yeah, 100%. I think John Woo, our president, had a good speech kind of really specifying and kind of continuing to enhance what you were saying. And I think a lot of people don't truly understand that point where you just mentioned they just go to the store and they use their credit card, but they're really not understanding like what that process is behind that. And to your point, blockchain does kind of increase that fluidity to kind of transfer money. And so I think continuing to educate people in that space of, where the benefits are for that is a great point you bring up.
Yeah, and maybe I can touch on that and how, kind of your first question, what is Ava Labs, what is Avalanche, how we kind of position ourselves against the competitors, which I guess you would know as like Ethereum, Solana, all these other layer 1 blockchains. These actually operate on a classical consensus mechanism. Ethereum, which used to work off the Nakamoto consensus mechanism, which now is proof of stake using classical consensus. This is a similar consensus mechanism that MasterCard and Visa use, which is great because it's fast. But the time to finality is actually the problem here because the validators all don't decide on that final decision on what the transaction's validity is, and that's why Avalanche is, as measured by success, the fastest time to finality because it operates on the Avalanche consensus mechanism, which was founded by Emin Gün Sirer, who is our CEO from Cornell. But that's kind of really what differentiates us as far as like the consensus mechanisms go.
And there's a great kind of visual if you go online and search. I think it's Snowball Consensus by Ted Yin, and it kind of visualizes why that consensus is so quick and so novel.
Nice.
So definitely recommend anyone trying to learn more about that to check that out because it kind of gives you a visual of like how quickly and why it works.
We'll try and make sure that link is in our show notes. That way folks can check it out later.
That's a good plug.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Awesome. So that was a really great intro to like who y'all are and like a little teaser about what y'all are about. I think this is a great time to segue into like a little bit more specific and talk about NFTs, right? So I think part of this conversation is meant to be about the kind of the state of the state, right? We've seen, you know, DeFi summer and then blew up into like NFTs kind of winter, spring, summer-ish, right? And so we've had like a number of good projects for a good long time. Some of them go all the way back to like Crypto Faces, which is pre-punks, right? And Illuminati, as in Truth Labs, they recently like resurrected that project, which I thought was really crazy. I think if we look at that, that's like a technology that's now been around for a couple of years. We've kind of hit that first like kind of summit of the hype cycle, and we're starting into like a solid trough, right? I'd be really curious about what are the kind of applications of NFTs that you've seen. We've obviously there's profile pictures and there's art, but what are the other kind of applications that you've seen over like the last year or two?
Yeah, I think we're in a unique spot right now in the sense that you know, PFPs were really the easiest and kind of first use case of NFT utility, right? You just needed to be a creative. There's no, you know, huge overhead involved, and kind of just needed a platform to basically share it and buy it and sell and trade. So I think obviously that's why we kind of saw this first boom in terms of what PFPs are. And in the long term, I do think that there can be, you know, some of these larger PFP kind of blue chip projects that can kind of evolve into brands or evolve into kind of larger than what they are now. But I think right now we're really starting to see kind of that innovative curve of, okay, what's next with NFTs? And so just in terms of kind of my day-to-day and different projects we've seen and speak with, I think we're really starting to just, you know, kind of come to the phase of different utility, whether it's NFT ticketing, whether it's NFTs involved in music, really starting to see a little bit more of kind of the art side of NFTs. So I think we're at a really exciting point where we're starting to see kind of new innovative use cases, but we're also just at the point where we kind of still need to build out some of that infrastructure to kind of bridge us to those use cases. So really starting to have some exciting conversations and excited to kind of support and see where teams are going to go with it. I don't know, Park, if you had any insights.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would think all this technology, and I'm sure a lot of y'all know, like operates on an S curve, and that kind of comes from like, you know, gets released, and then, you know, hype cycle goes, you know, parabolic, and then, you know, on the, you know, curve of the S is basically like filling in those holes of like why, you know, how to get it to the next like hype cycle, and it's right now it's at the infrastructure layer where we need to get all these pieces in place so that this technology that we have, you know, this newfound NFT technology that we have can actually be operated on within a greater, you know, circumstances, right? So I think like Jake mentioned on like ticketing, I think that's a great one. Loyalty programs, which I think, you know, Starbucks came out with a pretty big Medium article regarding what they were building with that. That's all cool. It's exciting, but, you know, as far as like adoption goes, it's just not going to be quite there yet because we're in a building phase of the market and we're having to fill in those holes in the pieces of the puzzle to get to that next layer of adoption and hype cycle. But yeah, I think Jake hit it pretty well. And personally, I'm super excited about, you know, our mantra at Ava Labs being digitizing all assets, and, you know, the new asset classes that have come and arose from what this technology allows for, in-game assets being one of them. This was currently or previously not an asset class, right? Like you couldn't actually, you know, accrue value over time from playing games and getting in-game items. But there's a lot of areas like this, right? It's not just gaming. Yeah. That's just personally where I'm excited because that's where I'm working in. But that's what I'm excited about is like unlocking all these new doors of asset classes.
Absolutely.
Wow. You know, when I think about what you had to say about infrastructure, I'm right there with you. Like when we see folks have got really excited, they wanted to participate in the art, they wanted to think about derivatives or royalties or all these different kind of like new financial opportunities and licensing opportunities that occur with these assets, and the ability to like move them much more fluidly than ever before. But so much of that experience has been kind of like locked in the wallet itself. And when you and I were taking that tour of the gallery upstairs, I was talking to that a little bit, this idea of like wanting to externalize that experience a little bit more and to help people feel value outside of their phone or their watch or, you know, whatever insight they might have into like where they're holding their NFTs. I think this movement toward game assets is like one critical part of that for sure. But yeah, I could see a lot more infrastructure come into play that would be looking at how do we, query against a wallet, cache off the values of the assets that are stored inside of it, whether they're PNGs, JPEGs, or I'm a big fan of sprite sheets. I've had this long running theory that we ought to actually have sprite sheet NFTs. And those are the fundamental assets for a game, especially for OG games like your kind of like Nintendo platformers, that kind of stuff. I'd be really interested to see what are the kind of companies that are building in that space, right? Because certainly we have, Unreal Engine, right? And they've been building that same engine for decades now, and they've done just a wonderful job. I think John Carmack always had a different ideology, which was to build, throw away, and then build again from scratch, which is why we saw such different engines as we've moved through his whole lineage of games that he's put out. I'd be really curious, are we going to see something from any of those kind of more traditional core platforms? Unity would be another one I would think of, and what would those integrations look like to facilitate this broader reach of game development?
Yeah, Parker, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, no, and it's a good question. I think the real thing here is the technology stack, right? What blockchain is it's basically, you have Unreal Engine, you have your game, but now you have Unreal Engine, which rests upon the blockchain, and then you have your game. And so I don't think it's necessarily operating with Unreal Engine and Unity as the people utilizing the blockchain. There's a lot of SDKs that allow these softwares to speak to one another fluently, which kind of goes into our infrastructure question. But a lot of projects out there that are working on these SDKs for Unity and Unreal Engine. I would say, to answer your question, who's operating in this technology and in this space, we're seeing a lot of uptick in Web 2 early adopters that are actually Web 2 legit gaming studios that are now they've assessed the risk. They've recognized that, okay, these guys have done it. They've found success. We're either going to be first to that or we're going to be last, and we're going to have to play catch up. And I think it's interesting. If I'm a Web 2 game developer at a large studio, I'm looking at this from Bitcoin, right? A Bitcoin perspective. Oh, I wish I would have bought Bitcoin in 2009, 2010. Well, you didn't, but now you see all these Web3 indie developers building and utilizing the blockchain, and it's oh, well, I can't buy Bitcoin in 2009 ever, but I can start operating and building on Web3 gaming now, and I think that's how people should operate with this technology. It's fit in where you can get in, and start building, and I think that we're slowly seeing a lot of adoption. The deal flow from the gaming team and the gaming side, we're pretty excited about seeing some of these larger players actually, dipping their toes in the water in this space, whether it be just, spinning out a Web3 subsidy and not exactly diving full in, but at least kind of trying to understand the technology and starting to build. But yeah, super exciting times for us on the gaming team.
Yeah, and I think just from my perspective, it's interesting because most of these games already have kind of the in-game economies to basically utilize this technology. And so I come from more of a kind of a sports interest background in gaming. And so if you look at Madden or FIFA, they have these game modes where you already have these digital collectibles that you then use on your team, and you can buy and sell and trade them using digital currency on the market. So they already have essentially this digital infrastructure, but now it's just, it's such an applicable use case to put onto the blockchain. But the biggest problem there is, one, these large studios obviously have, different things that they need to prioritize, and in making that change, there needs to be that infrastructure. But then two, I think bridging the user experience to make it as seamless as possible is also another big hurdle right now. So if you look at kind of the Reddit boom of late, I think they did a great job in a couple of various ways, being, you didn't have to leave the site. It was priced in USD, easy to make a wallet. So I think creating that user experience and bridging it in the easiest way possible, and kind of cutting off that friction, is a huge kind of thing that we need to focus on for user adoption.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense, and you're right to call out those examples as you did. When I think about the possibility that's in front of us, certainly Yuga Labs has already pushed a lot with Other Side, and they're creating a massively multiplayer experience from scratch, effectively. So that's looking really exciting. My friends in the Notorious Frogs NFT group, they are also building out really imaginative scapes that your folks are going to be able to move between and buy property within and work on. I think when we couple that together with this Starbucks idea of on-chain effectively reputation, that really becomes compelling because, you know, you can think about like how hard it is to like grind up the ranks on any kind of, you know, game like Overwatch or whatnot, right? Or League of Legends, etc., where you're having to like really work hard to get out of bronze. And what does it mean to have
Speak for yourself, Alex.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. But some poor souls have to like really grind hard. And the idea of having a portable reputation that could move from system to system or even be traded, I think is awfully compelling. And we've seen that even since the roots of online gaming. If you go all the way back to like Ultima Online and the original like Diablo games, people, even though those were like more or less solo experiences, folks were buying and selling their characters, and people were paying good money to have a fully stocked character that has all of the best lineup of gear, you know. So I think we could see a whole new economy break out of this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's literally all these micro economies, which is really interesting that like these game developers are now like monetary policy implementers, right? As opposed to it being like the Fed that's just doing, you know, their job one way or the other. It's now these game developers that are just creating these economies that they have to manage. They have to operate the inflation. They have to be able to be like, okay, what's supply and demand? It's like a crazy like concept to me because I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, our federal government's been doing it for however long, and I won't speak, you know, politics, but you know, however well they're doing right now, these game developers have to do it as well. But to your other point, like having these, you know, tradable like Web 2 entity, like selling your username and password. This is actually a big case study for Roblox, right? Like these kids that are, I mean, however old, like under 15, 16 years old playing this game. There's actually a pretty solid, or I wouldn't say solid, pretty large black market for like Roblox accounts. And these kids are, you know, using the black market, selling their profiles right next to, you know, illicit drugs and other things that they probably shouldn't be, you know, selling and even having to be like associating themselves with. And so it's a big case study and a good use case, or I guess positive, for Web3, right? Where it's like they don't have to operate on this. They can just do it from their own wallet. They can, you know, own and operate their each individual skin themselves. So I know that the Roblox team is, you know, actively looking at the Web3 space, but obviously they're much more, they're going to be a lot slower to adopt it, even though they have probably the highest need to adopt Web3 and blockchain. But it's very interesting to have to navigate that, especially when you're working with younger audiences. Because then these kids are taking on, you know, a financial responsibility. I think that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I think the other thing you touched on that was interesting is like how early we are in terms of like the interoperability. So like having, whether, you know, it's different token standards, having that across the board to be able to take an asset from one game and kind of trade it on a market with a completely different game, or it has, you know, just different perks within that specific asset. So whether it's you want to trade a token along with, you know, say a sword from a game, having that ability to basically utilize that all in one transaction and have that same standard across the entire infrastructure, I think is something that we also need, and we're pretty early on. And so interested to kind of see how that continues to develop as well.
So when we think about, if we turn back the clock a little bit, the, you know, arcades, and you could still go to Dave & Buster's and whatnot, but it used to be that like in every shopping mall and in like a lot of neighborhoods, you would have just arcades, and they would have like these lines and lines of machines, right? What would it mean to have physical experiences that where you're entering a space, you're interacting with like these different units within a space, but having this portability to it? Right? Because I can think of like the Dave & Buster's card, for an example. That's only useful if you only go to Dave & Buster's, but there's plenty of other games that are like out in the rest of the world. So I'd be curious about your thoughts on the applicability of NFTs toward like what would be effectively access systems, right? As you all were coming in the building, for example, there's like the kind of like HID kind of like key swiper, right? Where you like you press your little plastic card up against the wall and that unlocks the door for you. So I'd be curious about what are the kind of projects that you've seen that are a little bit more physical or a little bit more like real life.
Right. Yeah, I think, you know, that's a fascinating point you bring up. And I think that's a point that we need to improve upon as an industry in terms of bringing that IRL experience, right? So if you look at Web2 brands, like that's what they do so well. And early on, obviously, kind of being it tech focused in terms of Web3, I think it's offered a lot of value in terms of online, in terms of assets, but it hasn't kind of brought a lot of those experiences to life. And so, to your point, I think we're kind of starting to see use cases and different project teams working to do so. So I think something that's fascinating are POAPs and proof of attendance. And so utilizing NFTs to kind of whether it's token gated to get into different events, or whether it's kind of an NFT that you get airdropped for attending, I think creating a lot of different value through this tech that you can kind of is tangible, and you can kind of have that experience while kind of authenticating you were there, or also add additional value kind of once you leave the venue is super important. So the way I kind of think about it is any type of event, whether it's whether it's a sporting event, whether it's a Broadway, whether it's a movie, whatever it may be, I think we'll see a lot of things in the future where you'll attend, whether it's through an NFT, but then you get there and once you leave, your wallet will be airdropped, maybe a highlight from that event, that can kind of create additional value if it was a large historical highlight down the line, or two, just to have as kind of a memorabilia piece. So I think that's something that we're definitely kind of seeing, that infrastructure and that innovation being continued to be built out. But I think as we had touched upon earlier, just different events, contracts, ticketing, think that's very applicable to not only kind of take this existing business models and implement this technology, but more importantly, enhance the consumer's experience. So super excited for things of that front. I don't know, Parker, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I could say where we're going to be at in 5 years. I would say that, the Figital Space is going to be a lot larger in the next cycle, and just like being able to utilize the supply chain and utilize, actual real world assets on the blockchain for either traceability, for, just the fact of being able to understand who is the actual owner of this. I actually think an interesting area is like gun control, which is like a big topic, especially even here in Texas, and like having a unique identifier for like these like weapons that, whichever spectrum you're on that politically, you can still verify the owner of these. I think that's a really interesting area for like government use cases. I think there's a lot, like it obviously, everything that is an asset in the real world, in my opinion, will be placed onto the blockchain for verification of ownership. And I think that's where we will trend once the infrastructure is there and once it's smooth. Because right now that would require a lot of hardware to be operating on, which, for all intents and purposes, takes a lot longer to develop for R&D, for just manufacturing, which is why right now we're just operating in, the digital space.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the Figital area as well, which is something that I'm super excited about. There's multiple teams we're working with that are trying to do just that and enhance that experience kind of through blockchain. And so whether it's a piece of clothing, whether it's a painting, implementing this technology to whereas you can scan, using near field communication, pop up kind of your wallet in a digital kind of twin of that physical item, and then basically allowing that physical item to have different assets and abilities tied to it. So say similar to like a StockX drop where you want to bid on a piece of clothing, but now you can do so to whereas the piece of clothing is on a blockchain, so you know how many exist, the supply chain of it, but more importantly, you have that tech enabled into it now to whereas if you go to a different event, they can basically use that same tech stack to say, oh, you attended this event, now we're going to airdrop you an NFT of the event. So now that piece of clothing is transferable. It's authenticated, and then on top of that, basically you're creating more value because now I have an NFT that's also tied to this. So I think there's a ton of different possibilities that come along with kind of the Figital space. And like Parker said, I think some of the infrastructure being built out is just going to continue to enhance that, but there's a lot of exciting things in that area.
Awesome. Yeah, I would totally agree. I think NFT NYC this summer was a really great kind of in real life lab for all of these ideas. So for sure, I saw with Truth Labs and Illuminati, their project, they had an amazing party that you could only get into if you had the NFT. And so they were using a token gated experience where they were scanning your wallet at the door. And if you had the NFT, you got in. And then Cool Cats had a really fun Cooltopia experience where you got these wristbands and you would go around their physical space. And it worked a lot like the magic wristbands in Disney. If you've ever been to Disney World, and like you have those to like unlock your door and all that jazz. It's a very similar idea that they actually had like different physical items in their space, and you could like bounce your wrist against it and earn points. So I thought that was really interesting, where you were earning these points and getting rewarded for participating in a physical space at a physical event. And then they had partnered with Shopify so that you could convert those points into merch at their checkout system. So that was a really great kind of like end-to-end experience that I thought was all in one place. And then there was plenty of Figital examples. There were some that were really as simple as, a programmable NFC chip that had like, just an adhesive to it and you could stick it to literally anything.
Yeah, that's cool.
There was other ones that were much more embedded into things like patches and whatnot that you could like sew onto your backpack or whatever. And I think there's a world of opportunity there for sure.
Exciting stuff there. Yeah. Really, really excited to kind of see where that continues to be built out. I think, you're seeing, I think that can actually be a great use case to bridge some of these Web 2 kind of fashion and entertainment brands into kind of this space. I think it's an easier transition, when we go back to basically making it frictionless for these consumers. People are already buying and selling these clothing and these different items. Now, basically it allows you to capture more value through the blockchain. So I think just different teams working with these providers to kind of bridge some of their Web 2 strategy into kind of this realm is actually a great use case to continue adoption. I think, just the one thing with that is continuing to understand how can we make the user experience in terms of, signing up with a wallet, actually, buying and selling on the blockchain. That's something that obviously we have to continue to work towards. But I do see the Figital space as a real opportunity to onboard a lot of folks.
Absolutely. So I have like two other questions I'd love to ask. Number one is, what's next for Ava Labs?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to kind of the NFT side and what we're excited about, and then we'll hand it over to Parker. So I think, right now in our ecosystem, we see a lot of our volume, kind of as I spoke about, in kind of the PFP realm and the GameFi realm. So I think about 3-4 months ago, we brought on our lead, Dominic Carbonaro, to kind of have a sole focus on this specific vertical. So myself, Dan Queen, and Dom kind of are solely focused on the NFT side. And so we've really started to build out kind of a strategy and what we want to see and kind of what we want our identity to be. So we're seeing some exciting kind of volumes and projects and creatives kind of pick up now. And I think really in the future, there's kind of two sides to what we're excited about. One being more of kind of the commercial side of things. So kind of the examples Parker mentioned about, Starbucks, about ticketing. I meet with teams on a weekly basis that are trying to bridge some of their Web 2 strategies using this technology. So I think that's one side we're super excited about. And then on the other side, I think really kind of defining us as kind of the quote unquote art chain is something we're super excited about. So I think looking at different platforms and looking, years down the line, we're really excited about whether it's, one-of-one marketplaces, whether it's AI art, whether it's generative art. We really see that as kind of the future and lasting for a long time. So we're super excited to kind of dive into that space and support teams there. So I think, in the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to have some exciting things kind of down that realm that we're really looking forward to.
Yeah. And so what's next for Ava Labs? And I keep honing in on like digitization of all assets. And I think from a gaming perspective, sorry, this mic keeps getting away from me. From a gaming perspective, I think for the most part, a lot of our competitors, we all have our like lotto tickets as far as like some Web 2 or higher AAA title games that are going to be launching. Whether that be early next year or maybe even into 2024. We've all kind of locked in a lot of these deals and are excited about the potential there. Now we're kind of trying to focus a little more in on like these casual games like that we've talked about. And this isn't like our full strategy, but you know, we kind of wanted to establish ourselves as a gaming chain and to be recognized as such. And I think we've gotten there. We're in the conversation with, you know, all the major deal flow. I would say we are at least, you know, taking calls with the teams. And so now we're trying to focus on just getting some casual games on that are fun. We had like the play to earn kind of Ponzi-nomic games last year that, you know, I guess were fun for some people if you were early, but as far as like actual entertainment perspective, you know, I don't know if that was necessarily there. And so now like honing in on those like Pac-Man style games, Galaga style games, I think that's cool just to get like people onto the blockchain, right? That's kind of how you get your mom and your Uncle Todd onto the chain, is get them playing Candy Crush, get them playing like all these mobile, like super simple casual games. That's kind of like a next step. But then also still honing in on our, you know, strong ability to show off our technology as a layer 1 blockchain and what we provide to these games, and still getting these like larger deals done. I think that, you know, we're trying to find a fine balance now that we have those lotto tickets and like exciting times with like players like Shrapnel, where, you know, I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with Escape from Tarkov, but it's a similar concept game like that where, you know, the players will spawn in, you know, it's an extraction based shooter, so you're going to loot. All the loot in this case is NFTs. So in this case, it's high risk, high reward. You go in with your loot, you hopefully come out with more, but, you know, if you die or, you know, don't make it out, you will be losing that loot. So I think this is a really perfect application for a blockchain styled game. And so we're super excited about them and several other games in the pipeline that, you know, we're super excited about.
Excellent. And then my last question is, where do you want people to go to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you know, we have socials all across the board on you know, as Avalanche on Twitter. We have a Discord, and then I think, am I missing one? We have Telegrams as well, so can be reached across the board on those.
Yeah, and you know, not a day goes by where this guy doesn't walk into my room and call me P Fork. So my Twitter handle is actually like P4RRK instead of Park. But
I do call him that.
Call him P Fork.
And I can personally be found on Twitter at _Jake Cvengros _. So
excellent. Well, we'll make sure to add links to the notes on the video. And really, thank you so much for coming in today. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely, it was great to speak with you.
Yeah, this was fun, man. Appreciate it.